is up? What's TrainWreck watching? About to start. It's Boba Fett, episode 2. I don't know how Maniac and I didn't think of Tribes of Tatooine when we were comparing this show to Gangs of New York last week. It was right there for us. We'll be better, don't worry. We'll get on that. We'll get on that next time. But man, I can't wait for Casali and Maniac to break this down in this episode. What a fun episode. I mean, had some Snowpiercer elements, some elements of the 70s and 60s, a bunch of interesting plot lines that I think can spin out of this. We spent a lot of time in the pre-Mando timeline in this with the Tusken Raiders. I want to be a Tusken Raider. I think that's my takeaway from this episode, the biggest one. I would like that. I would very much like that. What a great episode. Continuing the theme of last week, showing Boba just be a badass on his own without any Mandalorian armor, without any Jabba support, just doing his own thing, dealing with his issues in the way that he can, showing he's a badass. I can't wait for these boys to break it down with you. Sorry I won't be there. I've entered TrainWreck Sports COVID protocols, but I'll be back next week. Episode 3 of Boba. Peacemaker coming. Going to be a great one. Have a great show tonight, guys. Good luck. Have fun.
Folks, welcome back to What's TrainWreck Watching. You know, if it's Wednesday, it's What's TrainWreck Watching. And of course, just like we started last week, myself and Micah Man, we are into the book of Boba Fett, but it's time to call in reinforcements, folks. And we know him, we love him in the form of Joseph Casali, Mr. Hollywood, Casali Files. How are we doing? How are we feeling back on the men, sir?
Oh, man, I am feeling great. I am done with COVID. It's just been such a crazy ride. But, you know, it was what the best medicine was the return of, Star Wars around this time of year. You know, getting the Return of the Jedi feeling back, because I have been so amped up about this show. I've been kind of, and I'm like trying to figure out what it was really going to be about. Obviously, we've had, 2 wonderful seasons of The Mandalorian, which to me is just where Star Wars should be right now. Sequel trilogy aside, I think what they're doing with the television shows have been nothing but magnificent. And, coming from episode 2, it's just been nothing short of amazing. I think what they're really doing, kind of opening, into a new world with this series, has been nothing but amazing. So I'm so excited to be back and talk about the wonderful Boba Fett in all his glory, of course. I can't wait to talk about this show with you.
Love to hear it. Love to have you back. So with that said, we left off last week. Mando had climbed the ranks. He had gone from prisoner to respected individual amongst the Tusken Raiders. Meanwhile, amongst Mos Espa, he thought he was gaining respect until he was attacked by some ninja assassins. And that's where we pick up this week. So with that said, kind of hopping around, there could be spoilers in here, folks. You always know with Mr. Hollywood, you never know. With that said, Joe, what were your biggest takeaways from episode 2, Book of Boba Fett? I know you were loving the Western vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it kind of bleeded off with my thoughts of the original episode too, because again, I think the kind of feeling we have gotten with this. Obviously, this takes place after. Not only, it's kind of cool how they're doing the dual vibe to it, where it takes place after where we've gotten from with season 2 of Mandalorian, but it also takes place after Return of the Jedi. I didn't really kind of. Like, before I talk about anything else, I mean, just witnessing how Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi after, he got kicked from Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and all that stuff. So to actually finally understand how he's alive after all this time is, it's very satisfying. It kind of, it's a little poetic too, because if you're ever any Parks and Recreation fans out there, you kind of got its due with that explanation, what they originally wanted. But so I'm all set for it. I'm all like, okay, I accept that he's back. I love that he's back. Having Tamara Morrison back, of course, was just excellent. And I think what they're doing with this show, having a Western feel, because that's how Star Wars was always kind of that space western with
Space
the
Western
original
is
trilogy and everything.
it's the textbook answer for what Star Wars was at the start.
Absolutely. So I think with what they're doing, and obviously we've known from the past two seasons of Mando, like Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, they really know what they're doing. So to bleed it off into this, which obviously it's not Mando season 3, but it kind of feels that way still. So it's just really exciting. But to see like his aspect of it, I mean, because it's Boba Fett. It's funny because Boba Fett was always this like random character that George Lucas created, within Empire Strikes Back, that never really had, its following until after the movies came out. And then when he was killed in Return of the Jedi, it was this huge uproar because they didn't really, with the merchandising and everything after Empire Strikes Back, they didn't really kind of fully understand what that character was going to mean to people. So to have all this lore and everything, behind this one character to lead into the show, I think is just so exciting. And it shows, I mean, having Tamara back, who played Jango Fett in the prequels, having him kind of, stand his foot and stand his ground, because obviously, Jabba the Hutt's gone. Bib Fortuna was trying to do the ranks, but he was taken out by Boba Fett at the end of Mando season 2. So he's trying to show his place in Tatooine, where just because the underworld is a little shooken up right now, like Boba is here and he's here to stay. So that's the whole vibe that I've been getting from that has been really exciting.
Yeah, a lot to take away. So we see that in this episode. So in the post-Mando timeline, Boba goes to Mos Espa. They pull the Rancor trick on the assassin. And by the way, when that Gamorrean guard heard Rancor, he was shuffling off that deck. But with that said, so they visit the mayor. What do you think of the scene with the mayor in the translation? Boba pushing his way around City Hall.
Oh man, I thought again, it's just like Boba really kind of like showing his place, like he's not messing around. I thought it's always interesting what they always do with the politics side within Star Wars. I mean, George kind of got a little sloppy with it in the prequels, but it's always
you mean carried away?
Carried away, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, of course, but so it's always interesting to see like the crime syndicates and all that stuff within, because Tatooine really is this realm of lunacy. So to kind of see that was it's always interesting. Star Wars always has those characters that kind of stand their ground. So it's always interesting to see what tricks they have up their sleeves and stuff. But again, it's Star Wars. It felt like Star Wars. It felt like it right from the beginning. So I'm just sitting there like a kid in the candy store, like, okay, like this is just awesome.
It really was. And speaking of standing your ground, so Boba obviously hears, that he has to go back to the sanctuary, and he goes there, and he's a little bit confused. He doesn't know if the enemy is within or whatnot. And we find out the dreaded news: the Hutts are coming back for that ass. The Hutts are coming back for that territory. So they come in, they got the, the litter, as they were talking about. They're being carried by these poor saps. I mean, my goodness. Mm-hmm. What did you think of getting a little Hutt action? So have you seen the Clone Wars?
Yeah,
the animated series, because there's a lot of Hutt action in the Clone Wars.
I'm still going through the animated stuff, but I mean, of course, and rightfully so, because Dave Filoni really has his foot within these shows, and he was massively behind the animated stuff. The Hutts were always this sort of thing. I mean, it's crazy because even the history of Jabba the Hutt, when they did the original movie, it was actually supposed to be just a guy, and that was what Jabba was, and then it kind of morphed into this big lizard when they did Return of the Jedi, and they swapped them back in the movie in A New Hope when they did the special editions. So again, but that's that's the thing with this series, is when they introduce these species, we really don't know much about them. So when I mean, of course, it's they like to have their cake and eat it too, because the Hutts were always like, coming back in the show and stuff. And I think in the animated movie, that was like the whole plot line was like a disciple of Jabba the Hutt. I forget what his name was, but it was like the little baby Jabba the Hutt, baby Hutt.
Oh, yeah.
So it's always interesting to see like what they got up their sleeves. I thought, I mean, I thought it was interesting to showcase like the Jabba twins floating through the town. Very interesting to see.
Did you notice the people carrying the litter were like struggling when they were there for like
of course.
2 minutes?
I mean, come on. Like even Jabba in Return of the Jedi, he was, he's just this big, giant, smelly slug, and everybody just respected him, even though, like when having like Leia chained up and everything, it was just more of a show than anything.
Oh, absolute show. No doubt about it. So speaking of the show, so we get the showdown between Fett and the two Hutts. The Hutts say that they're going to settle it at a later date. So that makes me think that they're going to try and leverage over Boba at a later date, because they obviously could have just tried to kill him right there.
Oh, yeah.
They could have tried to have their super Wookiee attack him.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, how are they going to be able to leverage Boba Fett? It was right now, he's playing by all the rules. He's making it hard to leverage against him.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe, they're still trying to figure out, what Boba, what's his intentions are now that he's back and everything. Because it kind of makes me think, too, like how much because Boba, he was hired from the Empire to, to kind of course with Vader. And then, Vader gave up Han Solo to him and he brought him back to Jabba. So we don't really even know his true alliance with Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. So, I think that's really, as much as it's awesome to have Boba Fett back, it's kind of really kind of showcasing like what is there for him to still prove? Because again, like the Empire is gone, but there's still kind of like little syndicates and everything, like kind of like the remnants of it. Like obviously it's still
everything's scattered. It's broken, but it's scattered.
Yeah, it's still years before, we get to the First Order and everything in The Force Awakens. So, I think that's really kind of what these shows, it felt like an underworld, like gangster story. Like as much as it's a Western, it really felt like,
there's an underworld.
Like I was watching The Godfather or something like that. So it's really interesting to see like what they're gonna do.
Most definitely. It is interesting to see what they're going to do. So what do you think ultimately is going to happen? You think Boba will continue to play by the rules in the coming episodes, or you think he's going to get down and dirty to deal with these opponents? Because his reign in Mos Espa is being questioned in a big way.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's just kind of, he wants to show, because even in the first episode, even the beginning of this, he just wanted to show respect and have respect shown to him. It wasn't like Jabba. He just had fear that was behind him. That was the reason why he was in control, where Boba wants respect and to be, noticed. So I think that already kind of showcases how much of a different ruler or leader or whatever Boba's trying to do, definitely show. Because obviously, within the kind of side of these episodes where it takes place after Mando, it already kind of showcases that, the Mandalorian are there, like there are people out there that are not just, Din Djarin and the Mandalorian, there's a kind of alliance within that realm kind of growing. So I think for Boba to, have his, watch on Tatooine, I think that's something, that he's trying to not only prove to himself, but kind of just, like I said, kind of just have his, take on what he wants to do.
So Boba goes back. He hits the Bacta, which in this show is an indicator that he's about to hit his dream sequence and go back to the pre-Mando timeline where he's currently with the Tusken Raiders. But before we get into that, let's talk some Picassos.
Hey, Picasso's freestyle. Let's do it. Hey, eating couple wings with a couple kings. They're my favorite things. Hey. That's all I got. I'm not a good freestyle rapper. Wait, hold on. Let me think for a second.
And we're back, folks, and we are talking, obviously, the pre-Mando storyline in Chapter 2, Book of Boba Fett. So, obviously, Mando has kind of climbed the ranks. you see him fight training with the Tusken Raiders, Casali. And what this made me want to do, I want to go back and watch that Mandalorian episode when Boba comes on the scene and is with his staff. I mean, I knew he was whooping ass back then.
Yeah.
But now I want to see him using the moves, and I want to see him. He kind of does this thing in Jumanji. The Rock's character has this thing where he could smolder. Boba Fett kind of does that though, but it's like after an ass kicking. Like,
oh yeah,
like when he strangled out that monster last week, like he had like a brief smolder. Like when he like comes down with like the chop, like he does the smolder. Like that's big time for Boba. But very interested to watch that. I was curious what you thought of the fight sequence, learning from these Tusken Raiders.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, it kind of not that it's just kind of an origin to like how we got to what we saw with Boba within Mando season 2, but it's very interesting to kind of see what he's going through, learning from the Tusken Raiders. Obviously, that's also a race within the history of Star Wars that we don't know a lot, but we do. Like obviously. They were in the original trilogy. They captured Luke and stuff like that. And then all the way to the prequels that, that Anakin, tried to free his mother from. So we know that they're a very bad kind of sort of group within
they've been portrayed as one, for sure. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Within the Dune Seas of Tatooine. So to see, their connection with Boba Fett, is really, really cool because he respects them. He doesn't just look at them as animals. Like he respects them. He agrees with them. He talks with them. So I think that side alone is something that, we kind of really don't see. We see a little, like it kind of humanizes, the Tusken Raiders, which is really interesting. And to see them like work together, even before we get to what happens within episode 2, is really kind of telling, he's, getting lessons from them. And it kind of morphs him into the warrior where we came to see in Mando season 2. So it's kind of really cool to see that different side of this savage group that we've grew up within Star Wars.
Absolutely. What these limited series have done is they've changed the narratives and they've shown how funny it is. Like for example, in Mando season 2, when they're storming the Imperial bunker with what's his face? Bill Burr. And they get saved by the TIE fighters, and it's a hysterical feeling because you feel like elated, but it was saved by TIE fighters. It's like now when he's with the Tusken Raiders, like you're seeing them in a different light. So it's changing the narrative. It's giving you a new perspective, which is really cool from this. And the fight moves are obviously very cool. It was cool to see him, Tamura Morrison. Like kudos to him as an actor because he's acting with someone who's kind of just giving him like non-verbals back and stuff like that. And he's able to still convey emotion, to still convey that desperation that Boba Fett's kind of feeling right now. He's kind of out of place, right? He doesn't have his armor. He doesn't have any like gigs lined up as a bounty hunter. He's a simple man making his way through the universe. But right now he's stuck in the middle of the Dune Sea with this Tusken Raider crew. So obviously they're training, and all of a sudden training goes off the rails when they run into this train. I mean, this reminded me of like a Rogue Squadron mission, Sally, with the train going through like the thing. It's kind of weird. Anyways, so they're getting shot at, and Boba Fett kind of, alphas the whole group. Like he's kind of still a neophyte in the Tusken Raider crew, and he goes, "I'm going to get rid of that," and he starts the quest by walking into a bar and just beating the shit out of everybody.
I mean, this whole the whole sequence within introducing the train and what he the steps he takes in order for them to kind of interact with it's straight Western feeling. I mean, even going to the bar, it feels like a Western, and that's what Star Wars kind of always felt like within
first scene of Mando was him walking into a bar.
So, and it's funny, like when they introduced the train, seeing that in the distance, I thought it was just they were going to introduce like another crate dragon or something like that. Maybe even in my head, I was, I don't know why I was thinking Dune. I guess probably
I was thinking animal.
Fresh.
I was thinking crate dragon.
Like sure. it looked like the Dune worm in the new movie Dune. So, but yeah, like a crate dragon. Like I kind of had that feeling that what it was. So when it was introduced as a train, and there was these, hunters on, and they were just attacking, the raiders. Again, it already started off with like that Western feel, and stuff like that. So when he goes to the bar to try and figure out like, what's going on, and like obviously this is Boba Fett, like he doesn't mess around, he doesn't question anything, he just it hits first, thinks later, and that's kind of like what he did. So when he came back with those vehicles, again, it's kind of setting up the hero's journey within our favorite. Like this was like a Clint Eastwood movie, like it really felt like that when they were taking down the train and whatnot. And it was just like, it's so exciting to kind of see, like same storytelling, but through the eyes of, something familiar within Star Wars. So it's kind of, it's always interesting when they kind of go this route in a way.
So what'd you ultimately think of the train sequence? I mean, Tusken Raiders can hold their own. They were So what are those, the Pikes? That they were fighting? Because then people were like, they're fish, and it's hysterical.
Yeah,
they call them fish and they're Pikes.
Yeah, it was something like that. I mean, that's kind of, they were like Admiral Akbar type thing. Like they kind of look like.
And again, two sides who are fighting, and they don't really know why they're fighting.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing too, because I mean, we don't know much about what that other side was. They could have just been protecting themselves too. That's we always get this feeling within Star Wars, the light and the dark side. Trying to figure out, obviously, when it comes from Luke Skywalker to Darth Vader, or Luke Skywalker to the Emperor, we know, what's good and bad. But, within Star Wars, and especially on a place like Tatooine, everyone's there to kind of protect themselves and really kind of, trying to survive at any cost. So that's kind of what it felt like, where it was these two different, races where they didn't know, right from wrong. They just were kind of protecting their own. So, from their side, they could have been doing what was right, and just, because they're the Tusken Raiders, like they're this, rash group that just rapes and pillages and whatnot. So it's always interesting to kind of see like that kind of storytelling, where now, we're kind of on the side of on the Raiders, where, in the past they were always envisioned as bad guys. Again, like I said before, within A New Hope and with the prequels and whatnot. So having Boba Fett team up with them, and we're seeing like a different side of them, I think that's, where you really get strong storytelling. And I think that's what works within, what Disney is doing within their time with Star Wars. So I really enjoyed that kind of side of it. It brought, a different light to something that you don't even think of. And I think having this realm, having this kind of storytelling within the Book of Boba Fett on Disney Plus, I think that's what works, and that's what makes it really interesting and still fresh.
And the world building you're talking about, I gotta say this though right now, Favreau, Filoni,
absolutely,
that code, they're the ones doing it. The movies didn't necessarily accomplish that. A lot of people were thinking that the movies fell flat in that area. So I just want to say that, because as a diehard Star Wars fan, these limited series have been a breath of fresh air versus the movies. So.
Absolutely. I've listened. Just to say this quick, I've always enjoyed the movies.
Get them.
I've always enjoyed the movies. I know they're not perfect in any means. I mean, The Force Awakens, when I saw in the theater, I just was smiling from ear to ear, because I was seeing a Star Wars movie on the big screen.
Everybody was.
And rightfully so. I think The Force Awakens, is the most enjoyable of the sequel trilogies. The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, that's when it gets very diversified and whatnot. There are things that happen in Last Jedi. I do,
Last Jedi was really good, but the Rise of Skywalker literally dedicated to undoing the Last Jedi and then doing its own ending. So it's very tough.
It's tough. There's still things that I, love about those movies, and I'll still watch those movies. But, to me, even though the shows aside, because the shows have really shown, everything. Return of the Jedi is my complete ending to Star Wars. I think everything else is just really, really fun fan fiction. And I think what they're doing with, the sequel trilogy and whatnot, I thought it was interesting. But I mean, I'm just a purist, with Jedi and Empire, and A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. I'm not even talking about the special editions. I'm talking about the original cuts, the theatrical cuts. That's my Star Wars through and through. So I think, what these shows have done, and again, not to, tarnish, those movies made money, and those movies I still, I still adore and just always have fun with. But it's always, Star Wars is always just like, everyone thinks it's like you have to love it or hate it, and that's it. I think, to me, and this is why I'm called Mr. Hollywood, because I think you could still appreciate something even though it wasn't done really well. I think you could always find something good in something bad. And like I said, Last Jedi had a lot of stuff in it where, I enjoyed, but there was a lot of stuff in there where I was just like, this isn't what's going on here. Like, I understand what they're doing, but this is just, this, to me, this doesn't feel like it was earned or whatnot. But, but I think, flip it around with what they're doing with Mando, and now with 2 episodes of Book of Boba Fett, I think this is really where, it works. This is really what Star Wars should be doing, is this kind of storytelling where it's through a series and it kind of showcases this kind of storytelling, and it looks beautiful too. I mean, everything from the production design and everything.
You know what looked beautiful was that final scene when Boba was getting initiated into the Tusken Raiders, and he starts doing the moves around the fire.
Oh my God!
And then everybody's doing the moves around the fire. Here's Phil. He's doing the moves around the fire. What a scene, Casale, right? That's how you do it. That's how you do Star Wars feel-good storytelling.
Absolutely, like a Dances with Wolves kind of thing. Again, I kind of, kind of showcasing what the Tusken Raiders are about, and obviously they have a philosophy, they have a code, they have their own sort of religion where, and of acceptance. So, it does definitely lighten things up where, Boba Fett was accepted in their group, and it was very nice to see. That's always kind of like what you want to see in Star Wars.
That is what you want to see in Star Wars. So you were just talking about seeing the good in everything.
Mm-hmm.
You were just talking about movies making money. You were just talking about finding the best even in the bad.
That's what I'm saying.
Matrix Resurrections.
Right. Here we go. You guys have been waiting.
We'll just go a couple minutes.
Of course.
Everyone's either seen it or they're not going to see it at this point. Not to say it's crazy, but with it on streaming and HBO Max,
this came out before Christmas, right?
Right before Christmas. Yeah,
right before.
I was super hyped for it. I mean, I knew that it was probably a cash grab. I knew that it was probably a cash grab. I did not expect the movie to admit that it was basically a cash grab. That they were like, "Oh, like we're cash grabbing," and the only thing I'll say is that it just had nothing of what made the old films great. You can talk about whether this is a good movie or not, but Matrix Resurrections is like a completely different movie from Matrix, and the big thing is that there's no action from Keanu. Oh. Basically, any action is just like force
using
pushing.
the force.
Yeah, so it's just silly to me. But Casale, give your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, this is fun because this is talking about 2 things I love, even though the sequels have been a little iffy. I love and adore the original Matrix. The original Matrix is one of my favorite movies of all time. Star Wars actually kind of being right above it. I love everything about the Matrix. The philosophies behind it, everything, the whole meaning. I think what they did in 1999 knocked it out of the park. And just everything about that movie is just perfect to me. The sequels I do enjoy. I do have fun with. Reloaded, I think it's a little bit more with actiony stuff, and Revolutions gets a little bit more dialogue, heaviness stuff. And I think what the Wachowskis were doing within that whole trilogy, I think they had a point, and it led to, said point at the end of Revolutions. I think that's what it was. Now with Resurrections coming along, this was something that it's funny, like this movie, again, like we had such a renaissance with Keanu Reeves. He came back. Keanu
has been on fire. That's the thing. That's the thing that gave this movie so much. I'd say The most legitimacy this movie had is that Keanu has been on fire the last like.
Yeah,
10 years.
Keanu, and obviously, and not to mention too, bringing having Carrie Ann Moss come back, because we live in a world, obviously talking about the Star Wars sequels, whatnot. We live in a world where now these big studios, they're rebooting their franchises, whether it comes to Star Wars or Jumanji or all this stuff. We're getting these big reboots, and that's where it kind of gets a little hairy with what the meaning behind it is, so I kind of had that already amped up when going into Matrix Resurrections, because I was expecting it to be like the Force Awakens of the Matrix, and honestly it kind of it felt like that, but at least to me, like the Force Awakens at least kind of had a point to where it was leading to, where like Resurrections to me. And it's funny into this.
Force Awakens was literally a best of Star Wars.
It was.
It had all the best things that made Star Wars great.
It
was great.
But with Star Wars, you can, obviously, yeah, like Return of the Jedi had an ending, but it didn't end on something where there was no way that they could make something else. Like, it makes sense that they kind of went the route they did with The Force Awakens. With Resurrections, I forget what it's called. To me, it
that's
felt
how
like,
bad it is. If there was anything resembling a decent movie, you'd be all over it.
To me, it felt like I was really, because you're going into this movie like, okay, so why are we going back? Like, why are they doing a Matrix 4? What is the reasoning behind it? And the whole time I'm watching it, I still felt like I never got the like, this is why we're coming back,
or what's even happening
or what's happening. It just like and it's funny, like going into this, we were kind of amping this debate up between you and I of like, oh, this is gonna be the fight of all fights, Agent Smith versus Neo, resurrected, and at the end of the day we kind of agree on the same thing. It to me, it just felt unnecessary, and there was a lot of stuff that was cool about it, like it was cool in a sense going back to that world, but again, the reasoning behind it just didn't feel like it was deserved.
Completely unearned
to the point where it's like, they're doing the whole like, okay, well, everything is just, like, it's the Matrix, it's like, okay, you could just reboot a computer program system. So it's like that, like their Neo is back all of a sudden because he was, just rebooted in, by the machines and that, but it felt like, what was the point of all of that? Like, like Zion is gone, so they have a new, city to save.
I do have to say, I stole this from another review, but the coolest thing was the talk about the robot civil war, where or the machine civil war, where some of the machines wanted to side with the humans and everything. Now there's your movie. There's your movie that you could have made.
That's exactly what you need. Yeah, like there's your movie. You can, because this movie too, it's funny. I remember, this was in pre-production for a long time. I think at one point they were going to do like a Morpheus origin movie, and they had like Michael B. Jordan, I think, tapped on to do it. And then stuff got like, moved along. I think like there was another director that was signed on to do it. But at the end of the day, Lana came back to do it, like one of the Wachowskis. Who knows? Because it really, it's crazy too, because this whole movie, it was so meta that Keanu Reeves worked for Warner Brothers.
Unbelievable.
It just felt so like, what are we doing? Like, we already got that kind of meta-ness within like other movies this year, like Free Guy and whatnot, so to have that within the Matrix, where I get,
if you're doing a cash grab in a metaverse, you need to do it in the right way, and they didn't
just,
do it
like
right.
I said,
plain and simple.
Yeah, it just felt weird, but it was cool seeing Keanu back. It was cool seeing Carrie Ann Moss back. Having like, listen,
that's the knockout. If Casale can't find a way to support it, he just goes it was weird. If he goes, it was weird, and it was like a $200 million movie. That's a stinker. Yeah, that's a stinker.
Yeah,
but I love you, Casale. That's okay. That's okay. Listen, it was a stinker.
Like I said, I always try and find a good in everything, but it was, but I'm definitely, like I said, it's tough. I can't even.
It's okay. It stunk.
I'm trying. It did stink.
Just like my camera is stinking and pulling me into focus right now. But folks, all you have to focus on doing is following us on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, everywhere where you can get your podcasts. because you'll get me, unfortunately, but you'll also get Mr. Hollywood, and typically you'll get the Micah man, Jake Micah here on What's TrainWreck Watching. Well, me, unfortunately, but you,
you unfortunately.
Fortunately, both of you, of course. Thank God to save the show. So make sure you're following along on there. That was our very brief recap on Matrix Resurrections, but our full recap on Book of Boba
Fett is where it's at. Boba Fett, give me
Can't
more
wait
of
for
that.
Chapter 3. Give us more of that, because here at What's TrainWreck Watching, it's not about next week's meal. It's not about next week's schedule. It's about next week's episode.